Hello everyone, my name is Oscar and you are watching the Virtual Fechtschule. It may be that you clicked on this video because you're relatively new to fencing with the Langes Messer and you are looking for an online resource to help you get started. If that is the case, then this video series is for you. After all, Messer is not longsword, so unless you are lucky enough to live near a club that already has an established Messer curriculum, chances are you're going to have to start from zero and figure things out as you go along. That at least was my experience when I first started practicing with this weapon around 10 years ago. Sure enough, there were a couple of people around me who had dabbled a bit and could teach me a thing or two, but by and large I had to figure things out by myself, trying to build up a bit of a local community and meeting other people along the way with whom I could learn this art of the long knife. And thankfully also occasionally I had the opportunity to learn from someone who had already been devoting themselves to learning the Messer for a long time. And I cannot stress how important that was. Because ultimately being a pioneer is very cool, but it's very difficult to completely have to reinvent the wheel yourself. Relatively early in my journey to learn all there is to know about fencing with the long knife, I started working with this book here. Hans Lecküchner's Kunst und Zettel im Messer. And this book is really huge. It has 432 pages and the number of pieces, which is choreographed sequences of techniques, approaches around 500. Working and learning from it is not easy. During the last year or so, I feel that my understanding of the weapon and the source material has reached a point where I can reliably teach not only the basic mechanics but also more complex mechanics and tactics, and teach it as a whole system. As such, I wanted to finally create that online resource that would really help people who wanted to get started with the Messer and do it right from the get-go. In this video, I'd like to talk a little bit about what this modern Messer manual video series will consist of and why I thought it was important to include these things. Now, over the course of the next year or so, I'll try to release a video in this series about every month or so. So let's not waste any more time and have a look at the plans. The most important part of this beginner's guide to the Messer will be 3 videos that will cover basic mechanics that you need to develop and maintain, more complex techniques and tactics that are central to Lecküchner's fight book, and finally all the main Hauptstücke or principal pieces of that source, looking at the role they can play in your system of fencing. Apart from this, there will also be videos about what gear you need to get started. So what protective gear do you need and how do you select a Messer that fits your training and goals. There will also be some additional videos that discuss a range of topics that don't fit a particular category per se, but are still very interesting. For example, a video about the role of context in your modern Messer fencing practice, how to make binding actions actually work under pressure, and similar topics that may come up. And finally, there's also a ton of really useful teaching videos up on Patreon, where I'm currently uploading a ready-to-go class on one of the Hauptstücke every month. Additionally, I'll also be making a series of lessons about developing your own style of fencing based on Lecküchner's many options. So check out my Patreon page if that strikes your fancy. So at this point you may be wondering, why go through the effort of taking a source and presenting it as part of a beginner's guide in such a way? Isn't it a bit presumptuous to do that for a source that's already written over 500 years ago and is even completely available in translation right now on websites such as Victonauer? And of course, my answer to that would be no, because otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here recording this video. But let me explain a little bit further. Literally none of the fight books were written with a modern audience in mind. For a lot of the later 16th century fight books, this may in fact not be so much of a problem, because they are often structured in such a way that makes them relatively easy to learn from. In fact, you may even argue that many of them were actually intended to be used for learning to fence from a book. The earlier fight books, and that includes Lecküchner's one as well, were probably not meant with that aim in mind, although that is still a topic for debate. But at the very least we can say that Lecküchner's fight book was structured in such a way to mirror the in-person teaching that would have happened at the time. So if you'd want to learn fencing in late 15th century Nuremberg, you'd probably go and take private classes from a fencing master. Nowadays though, we meet up with our friends in the evenings or weekends and we practice in larger groups. Additionally, during the Middle Ages, scholars assumed that the best way to learn was inductively, meaning that you try to learn by going through all the possible examples of a subject and then trying to deduce the principles behind that from going through all these examples. Nowadays, we approach things the other way around, often going from concept to context, from rule to example. When Hans Lecküchner wrote his fight book in 1482 with its 500 techniques including every conceivable counter and variation, it would have been a perfectly reasonable course book. But nowadays, to quote Robert Brooks, it's like doing a PhD in Messer. And I would never really dissuade anyone from completely working through Lecküchner's fight book because it's a truly awesome experience. But just like with a PhD, not everyone has the time or inclination to do it. And that's where my beginner's guide comes in. I've tried to structure things in such a way that budding Messer fencers will not have to reinvent the wheel, but they'll be offered a solid base to work from and also the tools to know where to look for the things they need in the fight book. Of course, I've done my level best to ensure that this modern Messer manual combines the usefulness to the 21st century fencer with the respect that a 15th century fencing source is due. I can only hope that in the eyes of you, the viewer, I will have succeeded in this endeavor by the end of the series. And on that note, I bid you a good day and hopefully until soon when we will properly start this fencing series.